كل الذين ينضموا للاستماع إلى راديو بلدي أول راديو عربي أمريكي ويعنى بقضايا العرب في المهجر. برامجنا في راديو بلدي كل يوم جمعة من 8 وحتى 9 صباحا مع ليلى الحسيني في بث حي ومباشر وعبر wnzk راديو 690 AM. صباح الخير بلدي، صباح الخير لكل مستمعينا.
Welcome to Radio Baladi, the first Arab, Middle Eastern, and American simulcast radio show. Radio Baladi is broadcast every Friday morning on wnzk 690 AM from 8 until 9 Eastern Time on Good Morning Michigan with Layla Al-Hussein. Our call-in number 248-557-3300. And now, stay tuned for the best radio talk show on Arab and American issues with your host, Layla Al-Hussein.
المرشحون الجمهوريون يهاجمون المسلمين بسبب عقائدهم الدينية. بيرني ساندرز يدعم لإنهاء العنصرية والكراهية التي تفرق مجتمعاتنا. حينما عبرت إحدى الطالبات المسلمات في الجامعة عن مخاوفها من الخطابات البغيضة في هذه الانتخابات، أجاب بيرني بقوله:
And if we stand for anything, we have got to stand together and end all forms of racism, and I will lead that effort as President of the United States.
في يوم الثلاثاء المصادف 8 من شهر مارس، صوتوا للمرشح الذي سيقف لنا جميعا، بيرني ساندرز.
I'm Bernie Sanders, Democratic candidate for president, and I approve this message.
مدعومة من قبل بيرني 2016. Paid for by Bernie 2016.
I am Atef Abdel Gawad. Join me the first Friday of each month at 8 a.m. Eastern Time. I will be discussing some of the most important issues and events in the Middle East live on America's Voice of the Arabs. WNZK 690 AM and WDMV 700 AM.
Good morning. Saudi Arabia's traditional caution is giving way to newly found assertiveness and risk-taking policies. Riyadh has decided to stop its financial aid to Lebanon's army and security forces. The reason? Lebanon's failure to side with Saudi Arabia in its recent diplomatic dispute with Iran. And while the war in Yemen drags on, depleting Saudi resources, the royal family has offered to send ground troops into Syria, ostensibly to fight ISIS. This comes as Saudi oil revenues drop, together with the age of its defense minister. The 30-year-old defense minister is the son of King Salman, who is also second in line to the throne. Many questions arise from recent Saudi policy changes, the most important of which is where Saudi Arabia is heading with less oil money and more risk-taking. Another question is, who will fill the void in Lebanon left by Saudi withholding of financial aid? Joining us to talk about all that, Ali Al-Ahmed, Director of the Gulf Institute in Washington, D.C., who will be joining us in a few minutes, hopefully. Abdul-Hussain, Washington Bureau Chief of Kuwaiti newspaper Al-Ra'iyah. And we will also be joined a little later by Hassan Mneimneh, scholar at the Middle East Institute in Washington. Right now, I would like to ask Mr. Abdul-Hussain if you think, Mr. Abdul-Hussain, the Saudi decision in Lebanon is a good idea, and why?
Well, I think it's a mixed bag, really, because on the one hand, the Saudis are sending a message they've given up on Lebanon. It's been a long ride. The Saudis have been trying to fight for the stability of Lebanon. It's been on many occurrences. Riyadh has tried to support the Lebanese after the 2006 war, when the Lebanese national currency risked inflation. The Saudis were there. They pumped cash into the FX reserves of the central bank. When the army needed arms, the Saudis were there several times to purchase arms from France and from the United States. And add to that the diplomatic support that the Lebanese have received from Riyadh over the past 2 decades. That's all good news for the Lebanese. Now, the bad news is that when the Saudis leave, many experts think that other countries will have to step up to fill the void, and many think that the Iranians might play that role. So this Saudi step might prove to be counterproductive. Well, so far it doesn't look like the Saudis have dissociated completely from Lebanon. True that they've had a few statements, or they've suspended a part of the aid that goes to the Lebanese army. But otherwise, Saudi Arabia still maintains an embassy in Beirut. Relations are still ongoing. Saudi Arabia still receives senior Lebanese officials, and I think with some pushing from the Lebanese, Beirut might still be able to recover a good part of the good relationship that has been there between the two countries over the past few decades.
Does the question of oil prices, does it have anything to do with that decision?
Well, I don't think this is the first time that Saudi Arabia goes through a dip in oil prices. I think the Saudis lived throughout the second half of the 1980s and the first half of the 1990s with low oil prices. I think this time Riyadh is more prepared to live through this crisis. There's a sentiment inside Riyadh that we've been there, we've done that, and this time the Saudis are more prepared. They have over $500 billion in their sovereign funds, which they can liquidate and use at any point. So it doesn't look really that the oil prices are dictating what the Saudis are doing in Lebanon. It might the oil prices might contribute to the Saudis to the Saudi largesse decreasing, whether in Lebanon or across the region or even inside Saudi Arabia. But I don't think we're at a point where prices actually dictate the foreign policy, especially at the time when we see Saudi Arabia going into confrontation with Iran, and we know that such confrontation would, and they know, the Saudis know that such confrontation would be expensive, and that such confrontation will require a lot of funds and money, and this is not the time for austerity, and I think the Saudis realize that.
It's interesting, a lot of people are wondering why Saudi Arabia is not cutting down on its oil production, or is not pushing OPEC, other OPEC members to do the same to try to stabilize oil prices.
Well, I mean, that part has many faces. On the one hand, some say that what if Saudi Arabia cuts production and then the prices don't go up? So I think that's not a guaranteed step, that if they cut production, then prices will certainly go up. That's on one hand. On the other hand, I think the Saudis believe that if they cut production, they will lose contracts and customers. And if they end up the only ones doing that, then other oil powers, especially Iran, now preparing to come online might find it a good opportunity to grasp these contracts and these customers of Saudi Arabia. So the Saudis think that they're not willing to lose some contracts only for the Iranians to win these contracts, and the prices will stay down because oil production worldwide, there's an oversupply, whether it's from the shale energy production in the United States, or whether Iran is coming back online, or even Iraq, which 10 years ago was not producing as much as it can produce today. We know now Iraq has the capacities to produce over 3 million barrels a day. So all these factors coming together, I think the Saudis think that if they were to cut any percentage of their production, it has to come in a coordinated step, not only through OPEC, but also coordinated with the United States and with other countries, with other oil producers that are outside OPEC. So the Saudis think that if they plan to do such a step, they have to have a bigger international decision on it, and they're not willing to be the only ones who cut, only to see others just grasp these contracts and these customers.
Let me turn to Mr. Hassan Mneimneh now, who just joined us. Mr. Mneimneh is scholar at the Middle East Institute. Good morning, Mr. Mneimneh.
Hello. Hi, good morning.
We were talking about Saudi Arabia's decision to stop aiding Lebanon's army and security forces, and my question is whether you think this is a good idea and why.
Well, it has obviously some positive aspects to it and some negative. On the positive, there was really, Lebanon, one has to understand that Lebanon is under effective Iranian control, if not Iranian occupation, even if it is via a Lebanese proxy, which is Hezbollah. But let's not hear minced words. Hezbollah is part of the Al-Quds Brigade, which is part of the Revolutionary Guard, and therefore Hezbollah is part and parcel of Iran's security apparatus and military expansion globally. That said, the way Hezbollah has operated over the past period is to keep plausible deniability about its not being in full control of Lebanon, a plausible deniability that encourages not just Saudi Arabia, but a number of other parties to keep on engaging Lebanon and keep on providing Lebanon with supplies that ultimately fall in the best interest of Hezbollah. So, in a certain sense, Saudi Arabia is calling Iran's bluff on that. That Iran is trying to pretend that Lebanon is not under occupation, and Saudi Arabia is saying no, we'll consider it under occupation and not accordingly not provide the support. However, that action in itself leaves Lebanon open to more direct Iranian influence, and one might say that a direct Iranian influence might ultimately be self-defeating, but up until it gets to be self-defeated, up until it defeats itself, it will cause more harm and more trouble and more problems in Lebanon. So indeed, this is it's an action that can be understood. It's a bold action to stop support basically for the Lebanese internal security forces and the army, but it's one that involves risks too.
Ms. Mneimneh, wouldn't you say that by doing that, Saudi Arabia would also be hurting its own allies like Hariri and others in Lebanon?
I wonder to what extent more harm can happen to Saudi Arabia's allies in Lebanon, along the lines that these allies have been kept under severe check by Hezbollah forces and their own allies, along the lines that, first of all, in Lebanon, politically speaking, Lebanon is utterly dysfunctional as a result of a decision really on the part of Tehran that it does not suit Tehran today to have Lebanon have a president or have a government that's functioning or have a parliament that's functioning. Then, whenever we have had over the past many years any Lebanese figure that showed any kind of insistence on independence or any kind of a position that is truly harmful to the Hezbollah project of plausible deniability, that person has been eliminated physically. So I wonder in this case when we talk, I mean, that there might be even further harm of that type, but we're not talking about an escalation, we're talking about a continuation of what was. Again, I'm not trying to portray here the Saudi action as being without risk, quite the opposite. I think it's a very risky move, but it's a move that can be understood because basically it's a matter of choice. Continue in the current course and risk damage to your own interests and to the interests of your allies, or try to do something bold, such as what they have done, and again, risk damage for your allies and risk damage for your interests, but with the ability of taking basically the lead in terms of trying to be able to shape some future to come.
Please stay with us. We'll be back after the break.
Ziyad brand. Quality products from our family to yours. Ziyad Brothers Importing offers the finest quality products, including brands like Sultan, Kraft, Nestle, Hook, Rico Picon, Donna, and many more. Ask your retailer to carry these fine products because you deserve the very best. For more information, visit our website at www.ziyad.com. That's www.ziyad.com. Ziyad, quality products from our family to yours.
From their first words to first grade, Dreamy Children's Center will help get your child on the right track. The highly qualified staff works closely with parents to provide an experience that goes beyond early education. We can help nurture important personality traits with the use of educational programs ranging from preschooling for infants to Montessori-approved programs and bilingual curriculums for young children. All meals can be provided and we can arrange for after-school pickup. Dreamy Children's Center in Dearborn Heights on Warren, in Westland on Ann Arbor Trail, and in Troy on DeQuinder.
المرشحون الجمهوريون يهاجمون المسلمين بسبب عقائدهم الدينية. بيرني ساندرز يدعم لإنهاء العنصرية والكراهية التي تفرق مجتمعاتنا. حينما عبرت إحدى الطالبات المسلمات في الجامعة عن مخاوفها من الخطابات البغيضة في هذه الانتخابات، أجاب بيرني بقوله:
And if we stand for anything, we have got to stand together and end all forms of racism, and I will lead that effort as President of the United States.
في يوم الثلاثاء المصادف 8 من شهر مارس، صوتوا للمرشح الذي سيقف لنا جميعا، بيرني ساندرز.
I'm Bernie Sanders, Democratic candidate for president, and I approve this message.
مدعومة من قبل بيرني 2016. Paid for by Bernie 2016.
I am Atef Abdel Gawad. Join me the first Friday of each month at 8 a.m. Eastern Time. I will be discussing some of the most important issues and events in the Middle East live on America's Voice of the Arabs. WNZK 690 AM and WDMV 700 AM.
Welcome back to our discussion on Radio Baladi. We have been talking about Saudi Arabia's new self-assertiveness in its foreign policy. And with us to discuss the issue, Hussain Abdul-Hussain, Washington Bureau Chief of Kuwaiti newspaper Al-Ra'i, and Hassan Mneimneh, scholar at the Middle East Institute. Mr. Abdul-Hussain, a few minutes ago, Mr. Mneimneh described Lebanon as being under occupation by Iran and Hezbollah. Is it under occupation?
Well, it's to a great extent it is. I agree with Hassan that Lebanon's sovereignty has been undermined for a long time now. The government of Lebanon cannot practice its sovereignty over its territory without the approval of Hezbollah, and Hezbollah has the upper hand in most of the issues, and Hezbollah takes its instructions from Iran. So while in a legal sense Lebanon might not be under physical occupation from Iran, by all means, the Lebanese decision comes from Tehran, and I think it's safe to say that in one sense or another, Lebanon is actually under the occupation of Iran.
Mr. Mneimneh, recently Saudi Arabia and Gulf states labeled Hezbollah as a terrorist organization. And my question is, why now?
Clearly, it has to do with some of the findings that, for example, lastly, the discovery that in Yemen, Hezbollah operatives were not only training the Houthis, but also instructing them on how to cause harm and damage in Saudi Arabia itself. But I have to note here, labeling an arm or a wing or a part of a military institution terrorist is a little bit of a half measure, because it is as if we're pretending here that Hezbollah has a decision-making process of its own. Hezbollah is part and parcel of the Iranian military overseas structure, and therefore I wish we would see a little bit more courage on the part of Gulf governments in order to label, basically to point the finger at the responsible party. The tool is not the terrorist. The terrorist is actually the whole institution that provides the instructions and the order to do. Lebanese young men have been dispatched to die in Syria, not because these Lebanese young men are terrorists. It's a part of a whole system that basically has indoctrinated them and implicated them in the Hezbollah structure, and then they were dispatched to die in Syria, not because of Lebanese sovereignty, but because of an Iranian decision. And it needs to be underlined as such.
Mr. Abdul-Hussain, labeling Hezbollah as a terrorist organization, will that make things better? What impact will it have on Hezbollah, and will it make things better for Lebanon or worse?
Well, I think the biggest fear at this point is for the Lebanese expats who live in GCC countries. I think the tricky part is to decide who among the Lebanese is member of Hezbollah and who's not. The line is really blurred, and it's really hard to tell who's Hezbollah, who's the rank and file of Hezbollah, who's a member in Hezbollah. Does sympathizing with Hezbollah count as being a part or a member of the group, or is it bad enough? Does it require that a Lebanese person with sympathies to Hezbollah who lives, say, in the UAE be deported from there and losing their livelihood and probably losing the livelihood of the families who live in Lebanon and who live off of the remittances of the Lebanese who work and live in Gulf states? So I think that the tricky part is to see how this decision affects the Lebanese community that lives in the GCC countries. Otherwise, I don't think Hezbollah will be affected per se. The Hezbollah leadership that lives in Beirut, I don't think that they'd be affected so much by such decision. And we all know that they get their money through direct cash infusions from Iran. There have been a set of sanctions, whether in the United States or in the European Union, sanctions on Hezbollah, and none of these sanctions have affected the group. The group gets its money and diplomatic cover directly from Iran, and we've seen at the time that Hezbollah was being under sanctions here in the United States, we've seen the United States at the same time handing Iran a bunch of money, over 100 billion. So Hezbollah was in fact receiving money at the same time when the president was signing the act to impose new sanctions on the group.
Mr. Mneimneh, also the Saudi and Gulf states decided to, or asked their nationals not to travel to Lebanon. They asked those who are in Lebanon to leave. How much of an impact, economic impact, will that have on the Lebanese situation?
That last item, not that much, because Lebanon has not been a tourist destination for citizens of Gulf states for quite a while. Lebanon has not been has not been a welcoming place, both for political reasons, such as exactly the control of Hezbollah, and therefore the nuisance that can cause, especially after a string of actions on the part of Hezbollah in reaction to as part actually of the Syrian conflict, in which basically there were threats against GCC citizens, but really the other component of it, Lebanon of late, as a result of the utterly dysfunctional government that it has, with all the garbage that cannot be collected, and the security situation that has eroded, and the overflow of refugees that are all over, is not exactly a tourist destination. And therefore, to the extent that we're talking about influx of tourists, that's not the issue. As to business, the business is, as Hussein was mentioning, it's the Lebanese expats who are in GCC countries who are the concern. It's not the reverse. It's not the GCC business in Lebanon that's the concern. And really here again, we have a situation in which Hezbollah holds the population hostage, because to a large extent the message from Hezbollah is harm this population and you're harming innocent people, but do not harm it and you do not know what cells I have within it, and therefore that the range of options that's available for GCC governments is anywhere between anyone suspected of allegiance or loyalty or even sympathy with Hezbollah at one end of the spectrum, all the way to certified carrying members of Hezbollah at the other end. And really there is the ability to move from one to the other is based on guesstimate and not on actual science, if you like.
Mr. Abdul-Hussain, is Hezbollah holding the Lebanese population hostage?
Oh, completely. They are. They've been doing so for the past 2 decades. It's not normal for any nation to be living under the mercy of an armed group that has the ability to project power outside of Lebanon's border, that's across the borders, whether towards Israel or Syria. When a group has this power, it has to be under the sovereignty of the state, and its decisions have to be in line with the wishes of the Lebanese population. And we know that's not the case. Hezbollah uses Lebanon as a base. It conducts its wars in multiple areas across the region. It even deploys experts to wage wars in Iraq, to train militias in Iraq, to help Iraqis in fighting American troops a few years back. All this military adventurism is really against the interest of the Lebanese people, or at least against the wishes of the Lebanese people. And so many times the Lebanese find themselves having to suffer with the consequences of Hezbollah's decision, whether having to suffer a devastating war that the Israelis had to launch in 2006, or whether having to suffer with the consequences of the spillover from Syria, whether in terms of refugees, or whether in terms of an interruption in normal activity, economic activity, an interruption of tourism in the country. All these factors, the Lebanese have to live with whatever Hezbollah decides for them. And the worst part is that the Lebanese themselves have no say whatsoever in Hezbollah's decisions. The Lebanese try. The leaders who oppose Hezbollah try to convince the group of not going into such wars, but so far, like Hassan said, the only thing that Hezbollah's opponents have gotten from the group are assassinations, pressure or physical threatening.
We'll be back after the break.
Are you going to start a restaurant or grocery store soon? Do you need floor plans and designs?
Call Naji Abood at 734-744-9796. Do you want to buy kitchen and restaurant equipment at discount prices? Call Naji Abood now, 734-744-9796. New Concept Products and Design, the trademark of kitchen equipment. 5% discount on all purchases of $75,000 or more. New Concept Products and Design, new location, 31185 Schoolcraft in Livonia. Learn more at www.newconceptproducts.com. Call Naji Abood, 734-744-9796.
Life for Relief and Development is a nonprofit charity that has been providing humanitarian aid and development to people and communities regardless of race, color, religion, or cultural background for over 22 years. When disaster occurs here or around the world, Life rushes to provide food, medical aid, and shelter to those in need. Life also has development projects that provide medical relief, water purification, educational programs, relief for orphans, and much more. Your help and support can greatly improve these efforts. All donations are tax deductible. For more information, please visit our website at lifeusa.org or call 248-424-7493. That's lifeusa.org, 248-424-7493.
Jumana K-Ruse. You've seen her images on giant billboards across the metro. Jumana K-Ruse. You've seen her images on buses across the city. Now get to know Jumana K-Ruse.
The war broke out in my home country, Lebanon. I was 11 years old, and I saw a lot of bloodshed and inequality and poverty. You can't grow up in an environment like that and not be affected by it and not want to make a difference. I graduated from Yale University with a master's in ethics. I speak 4 languages. It has always been innate in me fighting for the underdog and trying to do whatever it is I can to make a difference in the world.
Let Jumana K-Ruse protect your rights. Call the law offices of Jumana K-Ruse at 1-866-YOUR-RIGHTS, extension 100, or visit yourrights.com.
I am Atef Abdel Gawad. Join me the first Friday of each month at 8 a.m. Eastern Time. I will be discussing some of the most important issues and events in the Middle East live on America's Voice of the Arabs. WNZK 690 AM and wdmv 700 AM.
Welcome back to our discussion on Radio Baladi. We are talking about Saudi Arabia, Lebanon, and other related issues. Our guests, Mr. Hussain Abdul-Hussain, Washington Bureau Chief of Kuwaiti newspaper Al-Ra'i, and Mr. Hassan Mneimneh, scholar at the Middle East Institute in Washington. Mr. Mneimneh, both you and Mr. Abdul-Hussain agree that Hezbollah is holding Lebanon hostage. My question is, can you tell us what you think the real aims of Hezbollah are?
Well, again, in order to attribute aim to a party, one has to assume agency in the party. There is no such thing. Hezbollah is actually, it has declared itself as a soldier in the army of Wilayat al-Faqih, the rulership of the jurisprudence. In other words, the supreme guide of Iran is the leader of Hezbollah. And therefore, as actually the Hezbollah's own Secretary General has announced it in no uncertain terms, all of the decisions, whether they are religious, whether they are rational, whether they are political, whether they are military, have to be under the supervision, have to stem from the supreme guide. And therefore, in terms of its, at its core, Hezbollah is Iranian presence in Lebanon. However, I have to say, it's a very well camouflaged Iranian presence, because what Hezbollah has done is created a mini totalitarian state in Lebanon and a welfare state at that. one has to understand that its attempt at doing that is unparalleled in the region. It's a very successful model. Unfortunately for Iran, it cannot be repeated elsewhere because of the high efficiency of this model and the lack of, if you'd like, elements for such efficiency elsewhere. But one has to keep in mind that in the Hezbollah worldview, if you'd like, a child is born in a Hezbollah hospital. A child goes to a Hezbollah school, join Hezbollah Boy Scouts, get training in Hezbollah camps, is offered a Hezbollah-related job in one of the many companies that Hezbollah runs, serves as a reserve in the Hezbollah reservists, fights for Hezbollah, dies for Hezbollah, and his family, even after that, is taken care of by Hezbollah. So what we have here is a full totalitarian offering, because in addition to the physical that I have described, we have also the ideological, the religious. Hezbollah has affected change, severe and deep change, in many of the institutions of the Lebanese Shiite community. We have to underline here, Shiism in Lebanon is not incidental. Shiism in Lebanon is part and parcel of a long history. Actually, the conversion of Iran to Shiism was in no small part due to scholars from Jabal Amel, what is today Lebanon, part of what is today Lebanon, who actually spread a different type of Shiism, I have to say, in Iran. However, since what we have witnessed is through exactly the rulership of the jurisprudence, through Wilayat al-Faqih, we have seen the transformation of the official Iranian Shiism, which is not at all necessarily what you have at the level of practice, at the level of piety across Iran, but we have seen the transformation of this official Shiism into a doctrine that is very much so totalitarian and aims ultimately to serve the interests of the state that it creates. So Hezbollah in Lebanon pretends to serve the interests of its base, of its population, pretends to be part and parcel of the Lebanese political system. It has members in parliament, it has members in the cabinet, etc. But at the core of it, at the ideological core, it does not dispute the fact that it is a soldier in the army of the Supreme Guide of Iran. And therefore, I cannot say what Hezbollah wants, because Hezbollah that wouldn't know what Hezbollah wants. I'm willing to actually argue that for the leadership of Hezbollah itself, I do not think they wanted to be involved in the Syrian conflict. I do not think they wanted to dispatch hundreds upon hundreds of young Lebanese men to die in Syria in a war that is really not only senseless, but will create enmity with many Syrians, in particular because the war in Syria now has taken sectarian tones with the Sunnis of Syria, and therefore create enmity in Lebanon too. They realize how counterproductive and how damaging to the community, and if they do not, it would be even a worse problem. They realize that, but they are bound by their allegiance, bound by their loyalty to the Supreme Guide of Iran, and therefore are willing to sacrifice Lebanese interests, Shia Lebanese interests, in addition to those young men who are Lebanese young men who should not be dying in Syria, definitely not dying while killing Syrians in any case, in order to satisfy, to do what they are being asked to do.
Mr. Abdul-Hussain, Saudi Arabia has, throughout its history, been cautious in its foreign policy. That seems to be changing now as we witness a new self-assertiveness. What is happening?
Well, there definitely has been a change inside Saudi Arabia, at least in terms of leadership. We've seen a new king, King Salman, take over from his late brother Abdullah. And Abdullah had been the leader of Saudi Arabia for over 2 decades, even when his brother Fahd was still alive. But at the time, he was the person who was really in charge. And it seems there's some nuanced difference between the two. It seems that King Abdullah, the priorities of King Abdullah were to confront the Muslim Brotherhood first, and after them to look for the confrontation against Iran. I think with the new king, things changed. The priorities have shuffled a bit. Now Iran is on top of the confrontation priority of Saudi Arabia, and the Muslim Brotherhood is still there, but it's just probably relegated to number 2 of the enemies of the kingdom. And I think what we've seen since this new leadership has taken over is, like you said, a new assertiveness in standing up to the Iranians, whether in Yemen or in Syria or inside Lebanon or across the region. I think the Saudis have finally decided that Iran is a much bigger threat to their existence. The whole Saudi system is suffering from the Iranian projection of power, whether in Iraq or Lebanon or Syria or elsewhere in the region. So all these factors that have changed over the past couple of years have meant that Saudi Arabia has shifted from being a country that was trying to court Iran and to look for solutions with Iran. And then probably experience has taught the Saudis that Iran is really not interested in compromise, that what we're facing now is a new Iran that's been bolstered by the nuclear deal and the windfall of money that has resulted from the deal. So all these factors, I think, have pushed the Saudis to decide that it's time to just stand up to the Iranians and try to confront them in as many countries as possible. And we know that this confrontation, it just spans the whole region between the two. So I think that's why why things have been changing over the past couple of years in the region.
We have a caller on the line. Please go ahead, introduce yourself and go ahead. Hello? Okay. We lost the caller. So, Mr. Mneimneh, some people wonder if the real decision maker in Saudi Arabia now is King Salman's son, a 30-year-old defense minister.
Yes, indeed. I mean, there has been a lot of talk about that, and that he does seem to be to have a certain, if you like, decisiveness that and a certain bluntness that might have been unusual for the traditional style of Saudi statesman, which is typically very cautious, very diplomatic, very understated actually. But actually to link this question to the previous question that you asked, I mean, the main difference between the current Saudi government and the previous Saudi government is that the current Saudi government has not invested that much in the Obama administration to entertain the illusion that the Obama administration will be there, that the U.S. will be there for Saudi Arabia in terms of resolving its conflict with Iran, or for that matter, attending to all of its security needs. And therefore, there's a certain need for to take charge, to take the matter into one's own hands. And this is partly what we see, and we have been witnessing with the last transition from one king to another also a generational shift, and actually we might be even skipping a generation if you look at it from a pure age point of view. And indeed, Mohammed bin Salman has been one of the main figures who is pointed to, and some would like to see in him even the future king, and therefore breaking from the previous model of brother-to-brother succession. But I would say that Saudi royal family politics is too opaque for us to be able really to see what really happens behind the scenes, and therefore all of this will remain, if you'd like, speculation, even if it's informed speculation. As to the realization that Riyadh can no longer rely on Washington the way it used to do in the past, I think this is more of a fact.
We'll be back after the break.
أسواق زمزم الواقع على 24065 أرشد لك في مدينة فارمنغتون هاوس ترحب بالجالية العربية والكلدانية. تنزيلات كبيرة على عموم المواد الغذائية في يوم الأربعاء من كل أسبوع. لا تنسوا فريش كاري اوت، جميع انواع المعجنات، وايضا صواني الكمبو المشكله والصمون الحار، لحوم حلال الجاليه العربيه والاسلاميه الملحمه باداره قصاب الجاليه المعروف سلوان جربوع. زوروهم على 24065 اورشاد ليك في مدينه فارمington هيلز، او اتصلوا بهم على 248 476 0300. اسواق زمزم للمذاقي عنوان لجميع طلباتكم، اتصلوا على 248 476 0300. اسواق زمزم للمعامله الراقيه وكرم الضيافه عنوان.
مسافر وحدك وفايتني.
أمتي ترافل للسياحة والسفر بإدارة نبيل الباشا تعلن عن افتتاح مكتبها الواقع على 28695 راين رود في مدينة وورن. خدمات متميزة وخبرة تفوق 20 عاما نضعها في خدمة عملائنا الكرام. مع أمتي ترافل يمكنكم حجز رحلاتكم الجوية داخل أمريكا، الوطن العربي وأنحاء العالم، إضافة إلى الأماكن السياحية والاستجمام. للحصول على أفضل العروض وأنسب الأسعار ولمزيد من المعلومات اتصلوا على الرقم 586-578-9126 586-578-9126. أمتي ترافل، عنوان للصداقة والثقة.
المرشحون الجمهوريون يهاجمون المسلمين بسبب عقائدهم الدينية. بيرني ساندرز يدعم لإنهاء العنصرية والكراهية التي تفرق مجتمعاتنا. حينما عبرت إحدى الطالبات المسلمات في الجامعة عن مخاوفها من الخطابات البغيضة في هذه الانتخابات، أجاب بيرني بقوله:
And if we stand for anything, we have got to stand together and end all forms of racism, and I will lead that effort as President of the United States.
في يوم الثلاثاء المصادف 8 من شهر مارس، صوتوا للمرشح الذي سيقف لنا جميعا، بيرني ساندرز.
I'm Bernie Sanders, Democratic candidate for president, and I approve this message.
مدعومة من قبل بيرني 2016. Paid for by Bernie 2016.
I am Atef Abdel Gawad. Join me the first Friday of each month at 8 a.m. Eastern Time. I will be discussing some of the most important issues and events in the Middle East live on America's Voice of the Arabs. WNZK 690 AM and wdmv 700 AM.
Welcome back to our discussion on Radio Baladi. We are talking about Saudi Arabia, Lebanon, and related issues, and we have a caller on the line. Please introduce yourself and go ahead, sir.
Good morning. This is Zuhair Abdul-Hussain. I just like to say a few words. I would like to remind the gentleman from Kuwait that for the last 60 years, the only force in the Arabic and Muslim world who defeated Israel in 2 battles is Hezbollah. And Lebanon is the smallest country among the Arabic world. Yes, we have hundreds of thousands of Lebanese in Saudi Arabia working there. They have been generous, giving us money probably to rebuild Lebanon in 2006. But at the same point, we call, the faqih who control things in Iran. Who controls things in Saudi Arabia? Who is the faqih in Saudi Arabia? Isn't the king who does everything, and anybody who opposes will be beheaded publicly? Isn't the slavery of a human being going all over Saudi Arabia when you bring people from around the world to slave them to work 7 days a week, 10 hours a day for a couple $100? Have we heard about all what they have been doing? They want
Basically, they want Lebanon to be slave in their hands for the $3 lousy billion. The king went to France and he budgeted $5 billion for a 3 weeks vacation.
Okay, Mr. Abdul Haq, you made your point. Let me take Jerry is holding on the line. Go ahead, Mr. Jerry. Good morning.
Thank you. Good morning to you, Dr. Atef Abdel Gawad, Jerry Habba, and I want to salute your guest. My thought over here, Dr. Atef, and to your guest, it seemed to me it was a Cold War between Islam, Shiite, and Sunni. And right now, I believe the dialogue has been shifting to be an obvious war between the two parties, Islam, Shia, and Sunni, similar to the Catholic and the Protestant, when they were having a holy war for years and years. I just want to see the answer from your guest. Is it actually the Cold War turned to be an obvious a war between Muslim Shiite in Iran against Muslim Sunni in Saudi? Thank you very much.
Mr. Mneimneh, yes, go ahead.
Yes.
I wouldn't characterize it as a religious war, and I do not think it's a question of Sunni Islam versus Shia Islam. We have to keep in mind here that even these designations are a little bit of a construct, because Sunni Islam, we're talking about almost 1 billion people, and therefore there's so much variety and so many expressions and so many ideologies at times, if not religious theologies, within that broad spectrum. And the same applies to Shia Islam, which is several hundred million, and therefore to assume that there is one unitary form and to assume that Shia Islam is in a clash with Sunni Islam, I think this is not just reductionist, it's a little bit counterproductive, because it ends up becoming a self-fulfilling prophecy, because as if we're inviting people who label themselves or who identify as Sunnis to be in a state of hostility with people who identify or who are labeled as Shias. I think it's better to realize, to understand that what is at stake here is political interest, and very often actually at clash, in particular in this case between Saudi Arabia and Iran. And in both cases there's a reliance and a call on the religious theology and religious ideology in order to bolster the political position, and therefore the theology ends up being a little bit affected, if not a lot affected, by the political need of one or the other. There's no question that there is a very literalist religious institution, Salafist religious institution in Saudi Arabia, and there's no question that this religious institution has released edict after edict in which basically it considers Shias as apostates, etc. And on the other hand, there has been many practices in Iran, and even on the part, although it's a little bit more discreet at times, that on the part of many clerics in Iran, there has been declarations that basically consider Sunnis to be apostates for not having recognized the authority of the imams. But whether it is this or that, the transformation, meaning the motion from the religious statement, which after all is an opinion, the opinion of a cleric, to action on the ground, has to pass through many filters, one of which is political, that is the interest of a political power, and another is social and psychological, even when it comes at the level of communities. I mean, we have in Iraq, for example, the perfect situation to examine. We're talking about a society that has lived in a very high level of harmony, up to the point where basically intermarriage rates were up to 40%, at times more. And then all of a sudden, as a result of political interest and as a result of the actualization of these political interests into action on the ground, what we have today is some people thinking, or at least pretending to think for political reasons, that we're talking about two distinct populations that cannot coexist. So I think it's prudent to avoid characterizing the conflict as being religious, while recognizing that religion is being instrumentalized in this conflict in order to manifest political interest.
Mr. Mneimneh, the first caller, Mr. Abdul-Haq,
Can I please
talked about,
to him?
if you would like to comment, he is defending Hezbollah, complaining about criticism against Hezbollah, saying that Hezbollah is the only Arab force that actually defeated Israel. Is that a good enough factor?
Well, one has to make, one has to make, any assessment has to be based in place and time. There was a time when Hezbollah represented a national resistance movement against occupation. South Lebanon was under occupation by Israel, and the people of South Lebanon rose, and Hezbollah was able to basically frame that uprising and conduct what amounted to a national liberation war against Israel that resulted in Israel withdrawing. That's history. There's no question about it. But here, I have also to underline the fact that in order not to make it black and white, Hezbollah eliminated rival parties that were fighting Israel, and at times in ways that were really not exactly by asking them to step to the side, but actually to physically eliminate them. That does not discredit the resistance against Israel and does not take away the achievement that was the liberation of South Lebanon from Israeli occupation. However, capitalizing on that, which happened, by the way, it ended in 2000, in the year 2000, 16 years later, capitalizing on that in order to impose what amounts to an effective occupation in every sense of the word over Lebanon, and to ignore the interests of the population of Lebanon in its totality, including people that Hezbollah pretends to represent their interests, because Hezbollah is basically obeying orders from Iran, becomes a little bit problematic. We cannot, for the simple fact, which is an achievement, national liberation, the liberation of the South was an achievement. Although, I mean, you do have also people who would argue that it could have happened in other ways. Irrespective, that was liberation. It is to be praised. It is to be appreciated. It is part and parcel of history that the Lebanese in their totality can be proud of, irrespective of its many faults. And as I mentioned, there were faults. But to use that history in order to subjugate Lebanon today is what is not acceptable.
Mr. Mneimneh, Hassan Mneimneh, scholar at the Middle East Institute in Washington, D.C., thank you very much. I also would like to thank our other guest, Hussain Abdul-Hussain, Washington Bureau Chief of Kuwaiti newspaper Al-Ra'i. We discussed over the past hour Saudi Arabia, Lebanon, and other related issues. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you the first Friday of next month. Goodbye.
المرشحون الجمهوريون يهاجمون المسلمين بسبب عقائدهم الدينية. بيرني ساندرز يدعم لإنهاء العنصرية والكراهية التي تفرق مجتمعاتنا. حينما عبرت إحدى الطالبات المسلمات في الجامعة عن مخاوفها من الخطابات البغيضة في هذه الانتخابات، أجاب بيرني بقوله:
And if we stand for anything, we have got to stand together and end all forms of racism, and I will lead that effort as President of the United States.
في يوم الثلاثاء المصادف 8 من شهر مارس، صوتوا للمرشح الذي سيقف لنا جميعا، بيرني ساندرز.
I'm Bernie Sanders, Democratic candidate for president, and I approve this message.
مدعومة من قبل بيرني 2016. Paid for by Bernie 2016.